When I was in grade 11, I was in biology class, and at one particular moment in biology class, they'd been kind of teaching us how to run experiments properly. And it came to a point where they said, okay, now you know everything about how to run an experiment, now figure it out for yourself. So they gave us these little water fleas, and these little water fleas were so interesting because you could see right through them and see their little hearts beating. Now you had to do this under a microscope. They're very, very tiny, but you could take one of these little water fleas, you could put it on the microscope, and you could watch its heartbeat. And so you could sit there under a microscope and go tick, 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 and watch their heartbeat. And so our job was then to say, well, what might affect the heartbeat of these little water fleas? So each group came up with their own variable that they were going to test. And my group decided that we were going to test how oxygen levels in the water affected the heartbeat of these little water fleas. And so the idea behind the experiment was quite simple. We take water fleas in kind of their natural environment, we test their heart rate. Then we put them in water that has very little oxygen, we see how it affects their heart rate. And then we put them in water with a lot of oxygen, see how that affects their heart rate. So the first two are no problem, right? You can get water that has very little dissolved oxygen, you can get normal water. The water that we needed for the extra oxygen meant that we needed to bubble it through it. So you take an oxygen tank, you run a hose through it, and then you just bubble lots of oxygen through it until you get these super saturated levels of oxygen. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So we're just about to run our experiment, and we turn on the oxygen tank, and it's out. There's no more oxygen in our oxygen tank. So we go, okay, well, this is kind of unfortunate. But our little grade 11 geeky brains were like, oh, but we did this experiment in chemistry class. So if you take hydrogen peroxide, which is H2O2, for all you chemists out here, and you add manganese dioxide, which looks a little bit like charcoal, it's just a fine black powder. If you add manganese dioxide to hydrogen peroxide, it's a catalyst. And it breaks down the H2O2 into H2O and O2. So then once you're all done, you have oxygen, and it's all ready to bubble through our little system. So we said, okay, perfect. We've solved our problem. This is all great. So we have our Erlenmeyer flask, and the plan is this. We fill it with hydrogen peroxide, and then we decide we're going to add some manganese dioxide to it. Now, here's where we weren't thinking clearly. When we did this in chemistry class, we used like an extraordinarily small amount of manganese dioxide. Like we used like maybe the size of a grain of rice. And for some reason in my grade 11 head, I thought I would use like the equivalent of a tablespoon. So take this like full tablespoon of manganese dioxide, and I put it in the Erlenmeyer flask. Now, needless to say, the next 10 seconds of my life are a little bit blurry, maybe. So essentially what happened was an explosion. So from the Erlenmeyer flask, which is the one on the screen here, which is nice and tightly constrained, essentially made like, it exploded out the top. So on the ceiling was this ring of black manganese dioxide. My face was covered, and the reaction was so hot in the flask that it melted a hole through the desk. So now, my biology teacher was really gracious. She came out from the supply room, and she looked at what had happened, and she said, well, I guess that's biology for you. But I bring this up because it's funny, this reaction, which we thought was going to be kind of, nice and calm and easy to run, was much more extravagant, much more even violent, if you want to use that word, than we had originally thought. So I want to talk about the book of Malachi for a second. That's where our reading was from today. Now, if you have a Bible, you don't need to open it up, but when you do, if you open it up to the book of Matthew, which is the first book in the New Testament, if you open it up to the first page of it, and then you turn the page back one, or two in this case, you find the book of Malachi. It is the last book in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures. And to understand the book of Malachi, you need to understand a couple of things. First, it's kind of the last literary piece before Jesus enters the scene. And there's about a 400-year gap there. Secondly, you also need to know that Malachi is writing from exile. And we've talked about this before. We talked about it in Isaiah. We've talked about it in Jeremiah. He's one of the prophets, and he's speaking from a place of exile, a place of uncertainty, a place where the people of Israel are under oppression. And for Malachi, there's this idea that the Israelites, in order to regain favor with God, need to purify themselves. And it sounds, this is kind of my paraphrased version of it. So for Malachi, to follow God is to extend mercy and love and grace and forgiveness in the world. And if you don't do that, you die. And not necessarily literally. It's not like a lightning bolt comes down from the sky and you're all burned up into a little crisp. It's none of that. But if we don't extend grace and mercy and love into the world, then we are just a hollow shell of what we could be. So here's the text again. So Malachi starts this text. See, I am sending my messenger to prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to the temple. And the messenger of the covenant in whom you delight indeed is coming, says the Lord of hosts. So if we were to summarize this reading in one line, we would say someone is coming. And for people under oppression, and for people in exile, and for people trying to free themselves from their captors, this is good news, of course. In some ways, we all need somebody to come in our lives too and free us from the things that are burdening us. But here's where Malachi takes a little bit of a twist. But who can endure this day of coming, and who can stand when he appears? This is just kind of nagging question at Malachi. Are you really ready for the messenger? Are you really ready for this messenger who's supposed to come? Like, are you really ready for it? So he goes on, he says, for he is like a refiner's fire. So have you ever seen like a blast furnace? It's so intense. Or gold being refined, it goes through the smelting process, it's very hot. Or like Fuller's soap. Now, a note on this is kind of confusing language. Fuller's soap, there used to be people whose entire careers were bleaching fabrics, or essentially that. There was no such thing as bleach, and so their whole job was to come up with different ways to make fabrics white. That was their whole job. So talking about a Fuller's soap. So this person who's coming will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver and purify the descendants of Levi. Now that's a reference to the priests of the time, and refine them like gold and silver until they present offerings to the Lord in righteousness. So that there is this idea that even the priests themselves are corrupted by this exile. Long story short, it ain't going to be pretty. So someone is coming. Are you sure you're ready? Because it's not going to be as nice as you think it is. So let's try this a different way. Shirt, dirty shirt. So if I want to clean this shirt, like it's a pretty obvious task, right? Like dip it in the water and try to wash it. And thank God for washing machines, huh? So we add some soap. And if I had maybe my old grandmother's like wringer, washer, and washboard. We could try this another way too. But I want you to think of this experience not from my experience of trying to wash the shirt, but think about what the shirt is going through. Okay? It's kind of funny. Think about the shirt. Right now, is it a pleasant thing to be the shirt? Like, no, if I'm going to get this shirt clean, it's going to be an unpleasant experience for the shirt. And so we're like maybe halfway there, and the shirt is not having a good time. I'll probably put holes in this shirt before I get it clean again. I'll put it in a washing machine when I get home. So this idea, like, okay, we're trying to make something pure. We're trying to refine something. And yet for the thing we're trying to refine, it's not exactly a pleasant experience. And so I think that applies to our world as well. Like we're trying, if we're really trying to make peace, it may not be as pleasant an experience as we think it should be. So for that, we'll use bricks. See, we've created a system that in many ways is dependent on the oppression of other people. Like we have made a system where there are people at the bottom, and then there are people who are slightly above them, and it's very hierarchical. We don't have a formal caste system, but certainly this is kind of the idea behind much of what we do. And the people who have a lot of money generally can get a lot more, and the opposite holds true. And whether we like to admit it or not, I think this is a little bit what our world is like. And if we're really going to empower other people, which is kind of at the core of peace, right? Is making sure everyone has a job, making sure everyone has enough to eat, making sure everyone has access to health care and safety and security. If we're going to do that for these people, if we're really going to empower them, it might actually mean changing everything. And this moment where it falls down is not a pleasant moment. It is rather unpleasant. So we ask the question again, are we ready? Or maybe we ask it in a different way. Do we really want peace? Like, I kind of want peace, but I really like the lifestyle I live. And yet the lifestyle I live means that only a smaller proportion of the planet can live that way. So do I really want to give that up? Would I give that up for peace? And I don't know. The thing about Advent, which is so remarkable, is that we wait for this light. And this light is so subtle and so unassuming. We wait for a baby. When you think about a baby, you think, like, whatever. So helpless, so dependent. And yet for somebody like Herod, for the systems of oppression in this world, there's nothing more threatening. I want to leave you with two examples of this unassuming light. We've been doing this work with soup, right? We made these 180 jars of soup, and we were giving them away. And as we were giving them away the other day, it was such a fantastic experience because it could be considered gimmicky, but it was actually, I think, very subversive. So you go up to somebody on a street who might have actually crossed the street to avoid you, right? And you hand them soup, this just jar of soup. Where did this jar of soup go? Oh. So you take this jar of soup, and you say to them, "Hi there, I have something for you." So then immediately, what are they thinking? "Oh, what do you want for it?" And you say, no, I don't want anything for it. I just want you to have the soup. Okay, now they're really confused, right? There's this moment of like, wait, what? And then you say there's one string attached, and their face like falls. Like what? Is he going to make me like convert on the spot? Like just for a jar of soup? Like what's going to go on? And you say, no, the string is this. At this time, with all of your parcels, with all your commitments, with everything else that's going on in your life, just take the soup, share a meal. It's like, watch their facial expressions like, who are you? What do you want? Wait, what? I'm really confused. Oh, maybe there's a different way. And the other thing that's really surprised me and shocked me in the most pleasant way possible this week was on Monday we had a meeting here in the hall about sponsoring refugees. We had 50 people show up from Chemainus, which is amazing. And by the end of the day on Thursday, we raised more than $8,000. Like, that's surprising. That's amazing. And in a world where we often say, you've got to work to get what you have, we're inviting people in who have nothing and giving them a fresh start. It's only one family, but I think it's a very subversive act. So we wait for peace. Do we really want it? Maybe the jury's still out. But will we try to work for it? Well, I think we have, and I think will continue to try. Amen.